My best friend vanished in the woods when we were 12. 15 years later, I got a letter from him. But the letter wasn't the strangest part. The strangest part was what he told me to do next. I grew up in a town that barely made it onto any map. A place where everyone knew your name and your business, where rumors were passed around faster than school newsletters, and where time seemed to move slower than anywhere else on Earth. It was the kind of town where the most exciting thing that happened all year was the annual summer fair, complete with questionable rides and the same cotton candy machine that had probably been there since the 70s. I lived in a one-story house on the edge of the town limits, a few streets away from the woods that everyone warned us about, but nobody could really explain why. My best friend was named Mason. We met in kindergarten when he gave me his juice box after I spilled mine, and we had been inseparable ever since. He was the kind of kid who laughed with his whole chest, who always knew which tree to climb and which rock to flip to find toads. We made forts from branches and old tarps, told ghost stories in tents, and rode our bikes until our legs burned. It was the kind of friendship that felt like it would last forever. But then came that summer, the summer we turned 12, and everything changed. There had always been stories about the woods. People said you should never go there after sunset, that compasses spun in circles and people got turned around. There were tales about flickering lights between the trees and whispers that followed you even when you thought you were alone. Older kids dared each other to spend a night in there, but most chickened out or made up stories about how brave they had been. Adults just said to stay away because it was dangerous, unstable ground, old wells, sinkholes, wild animals, that sort of thing. But nobody ever told us the real reason. Mason and I didn't really believe the stories. We were kids. We thought we were invincible, so we went into the woods anyway, not deep, just enough to feel like we were doing something exciting. We built a small hideout out there, just a circle of rocks and a tarp roof over a low spot near a fallen log. It was our place, our secret, our world. That summer had been strange from the start. The weather was too hot and too still, like the air itself was watching. Animals were scarce, and the birds stopped singing around mid-July. But the worst part was the silence at night. Not just quiet, but dead silence. No crickets, no owls, not even the sound of wind through the trees. Just nothing. Mason started getting weird around that time too. He said he was hearing things in the woods, voices he couldn't explain. He told me he saw something watching us, just beyond the tree line. Something tall and still and wrong. I laughed it off, said he was probably dreaming or messing with me. He laughed too, but it didn't reach his eyes. Then one day he brought a notebook to the hideout, said he needed to write it all down. Every sound, every shadow, every strange feeling. He said it was important. I told him he was scaring me, and he said, "Good, I should be scared." 2 days later, he was gone. No one saw him leave, no note, no message, just vanished. His bike was still in his garage, his shoes by the back door, and his notebook was gone. The police searched the woods, dogs and drones and everything, but they found nothing. Not a shoe, not a footprint, just more silence. They said maybe he ran away. Maybe he got lost and a storm took him. But I knew he hadn't run. He would never leave without telling me. And I knew he had gone into the woods. And I knew something in there had taken him. They let the search go on for a week before they stopped, held a vigil, put up a memorial near the school, and then they just moved on. But I never did. I spent years blaming myself for laughing at him, for not taking him seriously, for not going with him that last day, for being a coward. 15 years passed, and then, last Tuesday, I got a letter. It was addressed to me, no return address, just my name and a postmark from my hometown. I opened it, and it was from Mason. The letter was written in handwriting I recognized instantly, crooked and rushed, just like the notes Mason used to pass me during class. The ink was slightly smudged like it had been written in a hurry, or by someone whose hands were shaking. The paper was old too, not yellowed like it was ancient, but aged like something that had been waiting a long time to be sent. The message was short. I'm alive. I need your help. Don't tell anyone. Come alone. You remember where? That was it. No signature. But it didn't need one. I knew it was him. I knew it in my chest, in my throat, in that part of your brain that screams before you even understand why. I held the paper so tightly I almost tore it. Then I read it again and again and again. I even checked the envelope for more, but there was nothing. I barely slept that night. My mind raced with questions. Where had he been? Why now? Why me? How could he be alive after all this time? And if he really was alive, then what the hell had taken him in the first place? By morning, I had already made up my mind. I packed a bag, messaged my boss some excuse about a family emergency, and got in my car. I drove 6 hours straight back to the town I swore I'd never return to, the place where I lost my best friend and part of myself. As soon as I crossed into town limits, I felt it, like the air was heavier, like the memories had been waiting for me just beyond the highway. The gas station was still there. Faded sign, one working pump. The corner diner looked the same too. Same peeling paint. Same menu probably taped to the window. I drove past it all and went straight to my old neighborhood. My parents had moved years ago, but the house was still there. New paint, new porch swing, unfamiliar car in the driveway. I didn't stop. I kept going. Deeper into the town, toward the woods. Mason's house was at the end of a long gravel road that used to tear up our bikes as kids. I had walked it 1,000 times, and every step I took now felt like walking back into a dream I had tried to forget. The mailbox was still crooked. The paint on the house flaked like old sunburn. But the windows were intact and the front door was closed. I parked on the edge of the road and sat there with the engine running, just staring at the house, waiting for something. I don't even know what. Maybe for him to walk out. Maybe for the house to vanish. Then I turned off the car and got out. The gravel crunched under my shoes the same way it used to when we'd sneak out late at night. The porch creaked, the screen door hung half open, and the front door was unlocked. I stepped inside. Everything smelled like dust and old air, the kind of smell that clings to curtains and books and memories. The furniture was covered in sheets, thick with time, but the floor beneath was clean. Someone had been here recently. I moved slowly through the house. Every corner of it flooded me with flashbacks. The stairs we used to slide down on sleeping bags. The hallway where Mason once dared me to sleep during a thunderstorm. The kitchen where his mom used to sing while washing dishes. But there was no sound now. No sign of life. Until I reached his old bedroom, the door was shut, but not locked. I turned the knob and pushed it open. It was exactly how I remembered it. The same posters on the walls, faded and curling. The same scratch marks on the desk where we used to carve our initials. But now the desk held something new. Another envelope. This one was thicker, heavier. It was sealed with red wax and marked with just one word. Soon, I broke the seal and opened it. Inside was a map. It was hand-drawn, ink on thick paper, and it showed a path through the woods. Not a hiking trail or something from a park guide. This was different. This was specific, detailed. It marked trees, turns, landmarks I half remembered from when we used to explore. At the end of the path was a symbol, a spiral, drawn over what looked like a rock or a cave or something else entirely. There was one more note beneath the map. Midnight alone. No lights. I stared at it for a long time. Then I folded the paper, put it in my pocket, and walked back out to my car. I was going back into the woods. And this time I wasn't coming out until I knew the truth. I spent the rest of the day in town, but I barely remember any of it. I went to the diner and ordered food I didn't eat. I walked the streets like a ghost, just passing through a life I used to live. Faces looked familiar, but I didn't stop to say anything. I didn't want to explain why I was there. I didn't want to hear the same old words about how tragic it all was, or how sorry they were for what happened to Mason. As the sun began to set, I drove back to the edge of the woods. The sky turned a deep orange, then faded into gray. The trees looked taller than I remembered, like they had grown just to swallow me whole. I parked where the gravel turned to dirt and waited in the car until the clock on my dashboard said 11:47. I took the map out again and unfolded it across the passenger seat. The ink was darker now, almost like it had soaked deeper into the page. I ran my fingers along the drawn lines and tried to memorize the turns. I left my phone in the glove box, no lights, he had written, and I intended to follow the instructions exactly. At 11:58, I stepped out of the car and walked to the tree line. The moon was almost full but hidden behind clouds. The woods ahead of me were pitch black. I held the map in one hand and stepped over the first route like it was a threshold, like I was entering a world that didn't belong to the one I had just come from. The first part of the trail was easy. Muscle memory guided me more than the map. I recognized a bent tree trunk where we used to tie a rope swing, a pile of stones shaped like a pyramid that we used to pretend was a treasure marker. Each familiar landmark made me feel more confident and more terrified. I walked for what felt like half an hour before things started to shift. The woods grew denser. The silence returned. That same suffocating stillness from the summer. Mason vanished. No wind, no insects, just the sound of my own breath and the crunch of dry leaves beneath my feet. Then I saw the tree with the carved spiral, just like on the map. It was fresher than I expected, like someone had carved it not long ago, maybe days, maybe hours. I ran my hand over it and the bark flaked under my touch. Behind the tree, the path split. The map showed to go right, but something in me said no. I hesitated, then forced myself forward. Right turn, 10 steps, a dip in the ground, then a narrow path between two thick tree trunks that leaned together like a gate. I passed through them and everything went colder. The moon slipped out from the clouds for a moment and lit up the clearing ahead. At the center of it stood a tall stone, maybe 6 feet high, shaped like a teardrop or an egg, rough and gray with veins of silver running through it. The spiral symbol was carved deep into its surface. I stepped closer and the temperature dropped again. My breath came out in puffs. My hands shook even though I wasn't scared, or at least I told myself I wasn't. I reached out and touched the stone. It was warm, not like sun-warmed rock, but body warm, like touching someone's skin. It pulsed once under my hand and I pulled away fast, heart racing. Behind me, the woods made a sound. It was not an animal. It was not wind. It was a word. My name. Not shouted, just spoken. Softly, like someone standing right behind me. I spun around and no one was there. The map slipped from my fingers. I crouched to grab it and saw something else on the ground. Something that hadn't been drawn. A second spiral. Smaller. Freshly carved into the dirt, like someone had traced it with a sharp stick just minutes ago. I followed it, my body moving before my brain could protest, through another narrow path, down a slope, past a crooked tree I didn't remember, until I reached the edge of a creek that hadn't been there before. On the other side stood a figure, too far to see clearly, but not far enough to pretend it wasn't there. It stood perfectly still, facing me, tall and thin, wearing what looked like a torn hoodie or coat, but it was the head that made me freeze. It was tilted sideways at an unnatural angle, like the neck had broken and never healed right. I wanted to call out, but my voice caught in my throat. Then the figure raised its arm and pointed, not at me, at the ground between us, and I saw it, something half buried in the mud. A backpack, old, soaked, torn at the seams. I crossed the creek without thinking and knelt by it, pulled it free from the mud and flipped it open. Inside was a notebook. His notebook, Mason's notebook. I opened it, and the first page said one thing: keep going. The notebook was soaked through but still mostly legible. The cover was cracked and peeling, but his name was written on the inside just like it always had been. Mason in big letters. Then scratched underneath in a different pen were the words, If you found this, then you're too close. I turned the page and read the first few lines. He wrote that he had been trapped for longer than he could explain, that the place he was in didn't follow rules the way we understood them. Time bent. Things changed. Sometimes days passed in minutes, and sometimes minutes stretched for weeks. He said there were others too, but most of them were not people anymore. They had become something else. He wrote that he had figured out a way to leave messages, to push things through thin places between here and there, that he had tried to send things before, but the forest only let through what it wanted to. He said if I was reading this, it meant something had changed, that maybe he had finally gotten it right. The pages were full of sketches and spirals and strange symbols I didn't recognize. Notes about places in the woods that no one should go, places that did not stay in the same place, trees that moved when no one was watching, whispers that fed on memory. He said he had been following a pattern, that every 13 years the forest opened wider and pulled harder, that he had seen faces of people long dead and voices of those who never existed. The more I read, the colder the air became. My fingers were numb and my breath short. I looked around and the figure across the creek was gone. The clearing was empty and silent again, but the spiral in the dirt was gone too, replaced by a new one carved deeper and larger. It led away from the creek and into thicker trees. The notebook said, "Follow the marks and do not stop no matter what you hear." So I walked. The trees closed around me tighter than before. Branches snagged my sleeves and roots tried to trip me with every step. The ground was uneven and soft like walking on lungs. The air was heavy and wet like something breathing directly on my skin. I stopped thinking in terms of distance or time. I only moved forward. I started hearing things again. First soft rustling, then the faint sound of footsteps not matching mine, then breathing that wasn't mine. Always just a little too close. Always just behind me. I did not turn around. The notebook had said that too. Do not turn around. Do not speak. Do not acknowledge anything unless it knows your name. I found the next spiral carved into a fallen tree. This one was deeper than the rest. The wood around it cracked and splintered like something had clawed it in. Underneath was another note written directly on the bark. One word, down. I looked around and saw nothing at first, but then I noticed a gap beneath the roots of the tree. A narrow crawl space almost hidden by leaves and moss. The opening was barely wide enough for me to slide through, and the smell coming from it was like old water and rusted metal and something worse, something rotting. I crawled into the hole without thinking. Every inch I moved scraped my arms and legs. Dirt filled my mouth and nose. The world behind me disappeared completely. It felt like crawling through the throat of something that hated me but needed me alive. The air was thick and the dark absolute. No sounds except my own gasping breath and the soft whisper of soil shifting above me. After what felt like forever, the tunnel opened into a space just large enough to crouch. The floor was stone and the walls slick with moisture. There were more spirals carved into the rock, deeper and messier, like they had been scratched in over and over by different hands at different times, some large and some impossibly small. There was light in the space, but I could not see the source. It was a soft bluish glow that didn't cast shadows, just illuminated everything evenly, like the air itself was glowing. At the center of the space was something covered in cloth, an old blanket soaked and discolored. I reached out and pulled it off. Underneath was a mirror. It was cracked in several places, and the frame was covered in moss and dried blood, but it still reflected my face, or at least I thought it did. But the longer I looked, the more I realized the face staring back at me was not matching mine exactly. The mouth twitched when mine did not. The eyes blinked out of sync. The reflection began to smile slowly while my own face stayed frozen in terror. I looked away, and the smile remained. I turned the mirror around to face the wall and stepped back. Then I saw something in the corner. Another notebook. This one was thicker, wrapped in leather, tied shut with twine. My name was written on the cover, Not Mason's, mine. My name on the notebook looked like it had been scratched in with something sharp, not written with a pen or marker, each letter slightly uneven and jagged. The twine wrapped around it was soaked and brittle. I untied it carefully, my hands shaking even though I wasn't cold anymore. The room felt warmer now, like something had started to breathe again. I opened the cover, and the first page was blank. The second too, then the third. I flipped through and found scattered lines written in a hand that looked like mine, but older, messier, more desperate. The ink was smudged and faded in some places, and thick and dark in others, like someone had stabbed the pen into the paper. The words did not make sense at first. Fragments of thoughts and memories that felt wrong somehow. Not false, but distorted. Twisted versions of things I had forgotten, or maybe never knew. Then I reached a page that stopped me cold. It said, "You came back like I knew you would." I turned the page. "You left me here. You don't remember. But you did. You made a promise and you broke it. You said we'd go together. And when the forest spoke, only one of us answered." I turned another page. "It is not your fault, but that doesn't mean you're innocent. You opened the way. You were the key. The mirror showed you the path and you ignored it. Now it shows me. Now I know where to go." I flipped through faster and found sketches of places I had just walked through. The fallen tree, the spiral stone, the creek, the tunnel, drawn in perfect detail. All from an angle I couldn't have seen, like someone had watched me from above or behind. The last page showed something new. A door, tall, narrow, made of black wood. No handle. Only the spiral carved deep into its center. Underneath was one line. "She is waiting for you." I closed the book and looked around the chamber again. The mirror still faced the wall, but I could feel it, like it was still watching even when it shouldn't be able to. I turned away from it and saw another tunnel, smaller, lower, carved into the rock opposite where I came in. The walls around it were covered in handprints, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, some too small to belong to adults, some far too large to be human. I crawled into the new tunnel, dragging the notebook with me. The stones scraped my knees and elbows. The smell grew stronger with each foot. Not just rot now, but something sweeter, sickeningly sweet, like spoiled fruit left in the sun. The passage sloped downward sharply, and I slid the last few feet into a larger chamber. It was warmer here and darker, the glowing light from before replaced by a dull red hue that seemed to come from cracks in the stone. The walls pulsed faintly, like veins. The air was thick with moisture and my ears rang with pressure. At the center of the chamber was the door from the drawing. It stood against nothing, not connected to any wall or structure, just freestanding in the middle of the stone floor, tall and black and smooth except for the spiral in the center. It looked wrong, like it was not supposed to exist here, like it had been pulled in from somewhere else. Its edges shimmered faintly like heat waves. Even though the air was still, I approached slowly, every instinct in me screaming to stop, to run, to forget this place and everything inside it. But my feet kept moving. When I was close enough to touch it, the spiral began to glow faintly. Red at first, then blue, then something colder. A color I didn't have a word for. It throbbed in time with my heartbeat. I reached out and laid my palm on the spiral. It felt like ice and fire at once. My vision blurred and I heard a sound like wind and water, and voices screaming from far away. And then I was somewhere else. I was standing in the same chamber, but it was different now. Cleaner, brighter, like it had just been built. The stone was smooth and polished and the door behind me was gone. And Mason stood in front of me. He looked older, not 12 anymore, maybe my age or a little more. His clothes were torn and his face was pale, but his eyes were the same. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I tried to speak, but no sound came out. He shook his head slowly and raised a hand. Then he spoke. not with his mouth but directly into my mind. You were supposed to come sooner. I waited. We all waited. Now it is too late. Now you have seen too much. You are part of it. He turned and pointed to the far wall, and as I looked, I saw something moving behind it. Shadows stretching and unfolding. Shapes I couldn't comprehend. Tall and wide and shifting constantly. They are waking up. You brought them with you. I shook my head, trying to understand, trying to scream, trying to move. But my body was frozen. Mason stepped closer and whispered with his real voice this time. I'm sorry. Then the floor split open beneath me, and I fell. I fell for a long time, or maybe no time at all. There was no wind, no sound, just darkness pressing on every part of me like the air had turned to water and then to stone. My limbs didn't move the way they should. My thoughts slowed, stretched, bent in ways that didn't make sense. Memories slipped out of order. I saw my childhood bedroom flooded with black water. My mother crying in reverse. Mason standing behind my reflection in every mirror I had ever looked into. When I landed, I didn't feel it. I was suddenly just there, standing in a place that was not stone or earth but something else. The ground beneath me shimmered like oil and felt soft like fabric. The sky above me was too low and too still. Not black, but dark in a way that swallowed light instead of reflecting it. Shapes moved in the distance. Tall, thin shapes like towers or trees or figures. I could not tell how far they were, or how large. They pulsed and twitched like they were breathing or thinking or both. I started to walk toward them because I could not stop myself. Each step sent ripples across the ground, and the sky changed color every time I blinked. Reds and greens and something like bone. I saw pieces of the forest here, but they were wrong. Upside down or stretched or melting. The swing rope from our childhood dangled from a tree made of glass. The creek ran uphill and spilled into a doorway hanging in the air with nothing behind it. I saw my bicycle half buried in moss and dirt, and when I touched it, my fingers came away wet with blood. There were voices now, soft at first, like wind through teeth, then louder, saying things I couldn't understand in languages I had never heard but still knew were meant for me. I covered my ears and kept walking because what else could I do? I had come too far to turn back, and I wasn't sure back even existed anymore. Then I saw him again. Mason was standing at the center of an open space surrounded by spirals carved into the ground. His eyes were closed and his mouth moved slowly as if chanting or praying or begging. The space around him shimmered and bent like heat over asphalt. I stepped closer and he opened his eyes. You should not have come. He said it with his face this time, not his mind, and the words echoed too loud, like the space around us did not like them. I told him I needed to know the truth. I needed to understand what had happened, what this place was, how he had survived. He looked at me with something like pity and said, You brought it with you. Not just the fear or the memory, but the opening. You were always the crack in the door. I only saw it first. I asked him what it was. He said it was the place before names, before time, before shape. A place that watches from behind the veil of trees and mirrors and dreams. And sometimes it wants to be known. He said when we first went into the woods, we found something that wasn't supposed to be found. We stepped on ground that remembered us. We looked into something that looked back, and it marked us. He said he ran that day, but he didn't escape. Not really. He was pulled back piece by piece until only his name remained, and then it started filling him with something else. He lifted his hands, and I saw they were no longer hands. They were thin and black, and moving constantly like shadows flickering in candlelight. His fingers split and curled and reached even when still. I stepped back, but the ground shifted and I fell again. Not far. Just into the spiral. Into the center of everything. And then I saw the truth. We were never alone in the woods. Not that night. Not ever. We had stepped into a place that was already inside us. The spiral was not a map or a warning. It was a seed, planted in our minds and watered by fear and time and memory. It grows by being remembered. It grows when you speak of it. It grows when you return. I saw myself as a child stepping across a route that bent like a finger. I saw Mason turning his head to follow a whisper only he could hear. I saw our footsteps echoing louder than they should have, drawing attention from something that had no eyes. And then I saw my reflection again, not in a mirror this time, but floating above me. A perfect copy of my body staring down, smiling slowly, not with joy but with hunger. It reached down and placed its hand on my chest, and I heard it, the voice beneath all other voices, the one that had no language but still said everything. It said, "Welcome back." When the voice finished speaking, the space around me collapsed inward like a lung exhaling for the first time in centuries. I was pulled through 1,000 moments at once, pieces of myself scattering into every version of the world I had ever known. I saw the town again, but older. I saw the woods, but darker. I saw my own face reflected in puddles that did not show the sky. I woke up on the forest floor. It was still night, the air cold and wet, the trees around me silent but real. The creek flowed as it had before. The spiral stone stood quiet and still. My hands were cut and dirty. The notebook clutched against my chest. I looked around for Mason, but he was gone again, just like before. No footprints, no sound, nothing. I tried to stand, but my legs shook like they belonged to someone else. I walked back toward the trail without thinking, not even following the map anymore, just moving like I was being pulled along a line that had already been drawn. When I reached the tree line, my car was still there, untouched. The clock on the dash read 3:17. Exactly 15 years to the minute since the night he disappeared. I drove until the sun rose, and then I kept driving, past cities and rivers and signs I did not read. I stopped only when I reached a motel with no name and paid in cash for a room with no windows. I slept for 2 days. When I woke, I burned the map. I buried the notebook. I threw away everything I had brought with me, but it was not enough, because I could still feel it. Something had changed, not just around me, but inside me. I started seeing things in mirrors again. Small things at first. A blink out of sync. A smile held too long. A shadow in the corner of the room when I was alone. Then I started hearing it again. The voice, softer now, but always there. Humming beneath my thoughts like a second heartbeat. Sometimes I wake up with dirt under my nails and moss in my hair. Sometimes I find spirals drawn in places I do not remember touching, on fogged glass, in spilled salt, on the skin of my arms while I sleep. I know what it means. I know what is coming. The spiral does not end. It just keeps pulling. It took Mason and now it has taken part of me, but it is still hungry. It feeds on memory and story and fear. It grows in the minds of those who hear about it, who imagine it, who follow it even for a moment. So if you have listened this far, then I am sorry, because now you have seen it too. Now it remembers you. You will start to dream about the forest. You will start to notice the silence. You will see the spirals. And one day, you will find a letter with your name and no return address.